بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب زدني علما.
So the next thing, let's try to understand some SD-WAN components. Like with SD-WAN, we have seen there are some specific components used, like we have WAN Edge, vManage, vSmart, and vBond, and they do a specific job, like the data plane, management plane, a control plane, and orchestration plane. So the first thing, we'll try to understand the WAN Edge devices. Now, traditionally, if you talk about a traditional network, we do have a management plane, data plane, and the control plane. They all reside on the same router. So we got a router, and this router is not only responsible for building the database, which is the control plane. It also do the forwarding, which is a data plane. And also we can telnet or SSH, we can manage each and every device individually. So each and every device have their own dedicated management plane, data plane, and control plane. Everything is inside the router. So we have to do it separately. So every device have their own separate. Like in the traditional routers, we used to have line cards, which will be doing the forwarding, the data plane job. And then you have a CPU module, which will be calculating the routing table. That is your control plane job. And then you also log into the device, CLI or GUI, to manage the device. That is your management plane. But again, with SD-WAN, these things have already changed. Now, again, each router have its own routing table, as we discussed. And each device is individually managed and programmed. And each device, we have to do it individually, like separate. Now, again, with SD-WAN, this architecture is completely changed. Now, with SD-WAN, if you remember in SD basics, SDN basics, we have discussed, we have a separate data plane and the control plane and the management plane. So we got the separation of these three. So for the separation of your control plane, we will be using some kind of controllers. And these controllers will be looking after the control plane job. And then there will be a separate devices for the management plane, like we have a vManage device, which will look after the management related job. We'll talk about more on that. And then the actual forwarding is again done by the data plane, the actual devices here. So the first, we'll start with the data plane here. We'll come back with the other planes as well. Let's try to understand how the SD-WAN architecture is going to be different in terms of data plane. Now, in terms of data plane here, we are not going to use a traditional routers. Like in traditional routers, what we do have a router. Let's say if I'm using some ISR 4000 series router, or maybe a 2900 router. So we have a dedicated router which has everything, it has physical interfaces which connects, and it will do the forwarding. So that is your data plane job. Now here, in case of SD-WAN networks, now these edge devices are replaced, and we call them as WAN edge devices. Now, same like routers. We normally call the routers or switches. Now, these edge devices, which will be installed on the remote location. Now, that remote location can be any of your remote branch office, or it can be a specific data center, or any remote office. So we are going to add some devices, and we call those devices as WAN edge devices. And these WAN edge devices are responsible for, now these WAN edge devices are responsible for doing the forwarding of the traffic between them. So they look after the forwarding job. And these WAN edge devices could be a cloud edge routers, or it can be Cisco XC devices. Like Cisco have its own Cisco IWS XC routers, like Cisco ISR and ASR routers supported for SD-WAN networks. Or it can also use Viptela devices. Like Viptela have its own devices, like 100 series, 200 series. There are some specific VH devices which can be used. So in terms of these WAN edge devices, we can either use the Cisco Viptela devices, or called as VH devices, or Cisco ISR or ASR devices, which comes in XE. XE is the iOS version it runs. So iOS XE, that's what we call it as. But basically, in terms of hardware platforms, they are ISR and ASR routers. Again, these data plane devices are deployed in remote locations. It can be branch offices or data centers or any facility, or even these devices can be on the cloud. Now, we have a specific VH cloud device as well, which can be set up in a virtual environment, and that can also connect to the outside network. Just like we have an ASA, physical ASA, you can also run an ASA V image inside the VMware. Similar way, you can also have these WAN Edge devices in the form of a virtual image, which can be installed on any remote server or even in the cloud environment. So each site is going to connect to a single or multiple links. Just like you connect a router, same way we are going to connect these WAN Edge devices to multiple links for redundancy, of course. One link, let's say, goes to your MPLS network, another link goes to your, let's say, broadband internet network, and one more link goes to your 4G network. So you have some multiple links connections, just like your WAN devices, the routers. So these WAN edges provide you the connectivity to your, through the service provider. They are going to connect to remote sites, and also they connect to the centralized site from where you're going to do the management. We'll talk about this a little bit later, probably the next. So they connect through these networks. Now, again, the data plane connections are established between the data plane devices, which means the actual forwarding goes between these devices. But again, it will be decided by the controller. So the controller will decide or push or tell which routes it has to install, which routes it should not install. And accordingly, the devices will be doing the forwarding job. So basically, the WAN Edge devices, what we use here, they do the forwarding job, just like a normal routers. So the only difference here is these devices should be capable of supporting SD-WAN implementation, and that's what the name used here. The edge, we call them as WAN Edge devices. And one more thing, the traffic which is going between, it will be encrypted. So whatever the traffic which is moving between these two sites, whether over MPLS network, or whether it is going over the internet, or whether it is going over the 4G network. So basically the traffic is encrypted with IPsec. And there will also be an authentication process to identify the source of the packet, the origin of the packet. So again, in order to learn the routes, we will be still using some traditional routing protocols here, like OSPF, BGP, VRRP. Again, we will see how exactly the routing information is built a little bit later on. So here, even these WAN edges, they do run some routing protocols, and they do learn the routes from each other through OSPF, BGP, and the VRRP. These are the traditional routing protocols are still supported in your SD-WAN network. So again, it supports zero-touch deployment, which means even though you are adding a new WAN Edge device here, now this WAN Edge device is capable of connecting to your remote controller, and from there it will be able to get all your configurations. So you can push the configurations in the form of some templates, and this device can come up and become a part of the network in a less time, and that is what we call as automatic provisioning or zero touch deployment options. So if you come back with the models, in terms of WAN Edge, there are two variations in this. We can use Cisco Viptela devices, like we call them as VH devices, or you can use existing Cisco routers. Cisco already have ASR and ISR routers. So Cisco upgraded few models to support SD-WAN network. In my next slide, I have those things. So you can either use any of these two products on your remote locations to be used as a Cisco SD-WAN WAN Edge devices. So again, Now, these two devices can be either physical or virtual. Now, you can use either a physical device or physical box, and those devices can be, again, it can be a Cisco device like Cisco Viptela device, Viptela VH. Now, in this VH, again, we have VH series like 100, 200, and then we have a VH cloud, which is a virtual. And similar way, we have something like ISR and ASR devices, and also we have a CSRV images, which can be used as a virtual. Now, these devices, now if you just talk about the physical devices, in terms of physical, we will be using Cisco ISR and ASR products from Cisco, which will be supporting which will be running iOS XE operating system, and which will be supporting your Cisco SD-WAN models. Like I think in terms of ASR, there is ASR 1000 series, and again ASR 4000 series supported. Now you have to check the Cisco website; these models will change. And also there is a Cisco ASR model which is supported. And this VH model is from Viptela. Again, this is Viptela image. Now again, Cisco acquired this Viptela, so it's called as Cisco VH now. And in terms of virtual platforms, you can use the CSR 1000V image, which is going to be used as a virtual image running on any server. And in terms of Viptela image, there is a VH cloud. So in our labs, probably mostly we'll be using these virtual images as our WAN Edge devices. Now, basically, whether you are running a physical appliance or whether you are running a virtual appliance, so in terms of configurations, in terms of connectivity, the things will not change. So as we'll be using EVNG for our labs, and for setting up the WAN or the remote locations, we'll be setting up few sites which will be running a VH cloud. Let's say a couple of sites running VH cloud, and there will be one or couple of sites running Cisco CSRV 1000V image, where we'll be simulating the WAN Edge devices. So again, these virtual images you can either deploy on any of your private network or even on your public cloud. Like at this point of time, it is supported on your Amazon Web Services, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure. So even if you're running in a production network, you can also deploy these WAN Edge devices on any of your public cloud environment. Like here, you can see these are the specific list of models, what you can see in this. As I said, from Cisco, ISR and ASR series like 1000, 4000, and ASR 1000 series models. And even there is one more model with ENCS that is also supported for 5000 series. And in terms of virtual, it will be CSRV. And whereas with Viptela, these are the specific models. We have VH 100, 1000, 2000, and 5000. And also the ISR 1100 4G. Like again, there are different models. If you check with the Cisco website, probably you'll find some more details on this. Okay, so what is exactly this WAN Edge? WAN Edge is edge device which is going to connect the remote sites, remote branches, data centers, and this device can be a physical appliance, or it can be in the form of a virtual appliance.